Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and unpack the most important insights. We give you that shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're diving deep into something that, well, it shapes the very fabric of Canadian life: immigration. We've gathered a really compelling stack of sources here, everything from academic analyses looking at, global anxieties around multiculturalism, right up to public opinion polls from fall 2024, detailed reports on economic impact, the role immigrants play in housing, the challenges they face, and even the government's own strategic plans.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is basically to explore the multifaceted reality of immigration in Canada. We'll take a look at some common anxieties, but also the hard data on economic contributions. We'll see how it connects to really complex issues like housing and understand the challenges newcomers navigate, all while seeing how Canada itself is adapting its approach.
So if you've ever wondered about the full picture of immigration, beyond the day-to-day headlines, this deep dive is crafted just for you. Okay, let's unpack this. For a long time, Canada has really prided itself on being, well, a global leader in multiculturalism. A bit of a poster child, maybe?
Definitely seeing that way.
But our sources reveal that even here, we're not entirely immune to some of the anxieties swirling around this concept worldwide.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you look elsewhere, particularly across Europe, and there's this strong perception that multiculturalism has, in some ways, kind of failed. And this has led to concerns about things like segregation, prejudice, even radicalism or oppression in some narratives. Some governments have even, rhetorically moved away from using the term multiculturalism, even if they still have policies that basically support diverse communities on the ground.
It's really compelling, isn't it? To see how some commentators have argued that Canada's maybe perceived smug complacency might be blinding us to similar stresses here. They've used some pretty stark phrases like sleepwalking towards segregation, echoing critiques from places like the UK. It suggests we might be heading down a similar path if we're not careful.
Indeed. You've had figures like Alan Gregg and Margaret Wente suggesting that the perceived failures in Europe should serve as a kind of wake-up call for Canadians. They argue our sort of feel-good multiculturalism could be masking growing ethnic divides. And they point to examples like data showing second-generation visible minorities reporting lower levels of belonging to Canada compared to their parents or compared to their white counterparts.
And we certainly saw this play out pretty intensely in Quebec, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely.
That whole reasonable accommodation debate became incredibly heated. It even led to a political party successfully campaigning on, well, an anti-immigrant and anti-multiculturalism platform.
Right, so this kind of begs the question, is Canada genuinely facing the exact same problems as Europe? Or are we perhaps interpreting our own experience through a different, maybe more positive lens? The research actually suggests that the claim multiculturalism is causally responsible for social ills like segregation is highly debatable. In fact, there's some evidence indicating these social ills are actually less prominent in European countries that adopted multiculturalism policies compared to those that didn't. So, the picture is definitely more complex than simple cause and effect.
Okay, so while Canada has historically shown, pretty widespread support for immigration, our sources point to a really dramatic and very recent shift in public opinion. It really stands out.
It's truly noteworthy how quickly public sentiment has changed. Just think about it. For the first time in, a quarter century, a clear majority, nearly 6 out of 10 Canadians, 58% as of fall 2024, now believe the country is accepting too many immigrants.
Wow, 58%.
Yeah. And this isn't just a slight shift, it's a massive swing. It jumped 14 percentage points in a single year. And that built on an even bigger 17-point increase the year before that.
So it's accelerating.
It really is. It's the fastest change recorded since this question was first asked way back in 1977. And that takes us back to sentiment levels we haven't seen since, the late 90s.
That is a profound flip in public perception. And it's not just localized to one area, is it? Though I think the prairies saw the biggest change.
That's right. The prairies saw the most substantial change. But Quebec, interestingly, shows relatively less concern, according to the data we have. It's also pretty compelling that this sentiment isn't really divided along immigrant status lines, first-generation Canadians and those born in Canada. Very little difference in their perspectives on this.
So what's driving it then?
Well, the primary drivers seem quite tangible. Housing availability and affordability, number one, then the overall state of the economy, and just general concerns about overpopulation. And increasingly, there's also specific concern about how the immigration system itself is being managed by the government.
Okay, so it sounds less like a kind of abstract threat to Canadian values thing,
Exactly.
and much more about practical everyday concerns, infrastructure, economic strain, that sort of thing. But our sources also point to maybe rising doubts about who is being admitted and how well they're integrating.
Yes, the data does indicate that. You see numbers like 43% of Canadians believing many claiming to be refugees aren't real, quotation marks around that, and 57% feel too many immigrants aren't adopting Canadian values. Concerns about immigration and increasing crime have also risen significantly since 2019.
Right.
But despite all this, when you actually ask people about priorities for who should come, Canadians still overwhelmingly value immigrants with specialized skills at 73%, a good education 64% for permanent settlement. They prioritize temporary foreign workers and international students less, at least for that long-term residency piece.
Okay, so with public opinion shifting like that, let's explore another, maybe surprising, twist our sources uncovered. What happens after immigrants arrive? Specifically, this concept that's been dubbed the leaky bucket. What does this phenomenon tell us about immigrant retention?
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, our sources reveal that, a growing number of immigrants are actually choosing to leave Canada. It's this phenomenon now termed onward migration.
Hmm.
And the proportion leaving, it's reached an all-time high. The estimate is that 1 in every 5 immigrants is expected to depart within 25 years.
1 in 5. That's significant. So it's not just about who's coming in, but critically who's choosing to stay. And this leaky bucket starts emptying pretty early on, doesn't it?
Precisely. A significant chunk, 34% of these onward migrants, leave within the first 5 years. The highest risk of departure seems to be between 3 and 7 years after arrival, peaking right around that 5-year mark. To give you a sort of concrete example, Canada plans to admit, say, 395,000 permanent residents in 2025. Based on these trends, about 25,500 of them are expected to leave by 2030.
Wow. That's quite a churn.
It is.
And what's particularly striking, I thought, from our sources is that it's often the economic immigrants who are most likely to leave. These are the people hand-selected to support Canada's growth, fill labor needs. They make up almost half of all onward migrants. What does that tell us? Is it about selection, integration?
It definitely raises a vital question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the effectiveness of our current selection, or maybe our integration efforts, or both. And perhaps even more surprisingly, international students. The ones who only held a study permit before becoming permanent residents.
Yeah.
They're at a particularly high risk of leaving, especially right at that 5-year milestone. So it implies, we're investing significantly in their education, their development here in Canada.
But we're not always keeping them for the long haul.
Exactly. Not reaping those long-term benefits we hope for.
What about language? Does that play a role in who leaves and maybe how early they leave?
It absolutely does. Francophone immigrants show higher onward migration rates than Anglophones or Allophones. And what's especially interesting here is that Francophones tend to leave even earlier. Their peak departure actually occurs at just 2 years after arrival.
2 years? That's fast.
Very fast. And in the long term, Canada is losing about 1/3 of its Francophone immigrant population. This trend is particularly pronounced in Ontario, which is, a significant challenge for Canada's bilingual goals and supporting those minority language communities.
And geographically, are people leaving from certain regions more than others? Or is it spread out?
Well, Ontario, BC, and Quebec naturally see the largest share of onward migration just because they receive the most immigrants overall. Makes sense.
Right. Volume.
But the Atlantic region really stands out. It has the highest proportion of immigrants leaving within the first 5 years, and also the highest cumulative onward migration rates across the entire country.
So those regional programs face a real uphill battle.
A serious challenge for those regional immigration initiatives aiming to boost populations there.
Yeah. And an interesting detail is that immigrants leaving Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, they're more likely to be from the smaller towns outside the main hubs like Halifax or Moncton.
So when we add this all up,
Yeah.
it means we're losing valuable talent. We're losing the investments, considerable investments made in their settlement and integration. It's really a drain on our national potential.
He really is.
Okay, but despite these challenges, and despite those recent shifts in public anxieties we talked about, our deep dive also reveals the undeniable, profound, positive economic impact immigrants have on Canada. Absolutely. I mean, the raw numbers just speak volumes here. Between 2022 and 2023, nearly 98% of Canada's population growth came from net international migration. 98%.
Almost all of it.
Almost all of it. And a large majority, 58% of the 440,000 immigrants who granted permanent residency in that period, were economic immigrants, directly selected for their potential contribution. And, we're targeting another 1.5 million more permanent residents between 2024 and 2026.
And this influx directly addresses one of Canada's big looming demographic challenges, doesn't it? The aging population.
Precisely. Canada, like specific provinces such as British Columbia, faces an aging population. We have a significant number of workers projected to retire in the next decade. Immigrants are predominantly of prime working age, usually between 25 and 54. And non-permanent residents like international students and temporary foreign workers, they're concentrated in even younger age groups, maybe 15 to 35. So this steady influx really helps offset our aging demographics and fills potential labor shortages in key industries.
So where are these newcomers typically finding their place in the workforce? Which sectors?
Well, immigrants are making diverse and significant contributions across various sectors. The 2021 census data shows them particularly concentrated in healthcare and social assistance.
Critical areas.
Hugely critical. Also manufacturing and retail trade. Non-permanent residents, meanwhile, are predominantly in retail, accommodation and food services, and transportation and warehousing, often in roles with more flexible schedules, perhaps while studying.
And what about the bigger economic picture? Beyond just filling existing jobs, are they actually, moving the needle on productivity and growth?
Yeah, this is a key insight that emerges when we look at their impact on firm productivity. Research indicates that a 10-point increase in the share of immigrant workers in a firm is associated with about a 1.5% rise in productivity.
Okay.
And that translates directly to higher wages for employees and greater business profits. And interestingly, this effect actually strengthens over time. It shows a kind of compounding benefit as immigrants integrate more fully into the workplace.
And they're also boosting our global connections, our trade relationships, right?
Yes, absolute pivotal role there. A 10% increase in the immigrant population in Canada can lead to something like a 4.3% increase in Canadian exports.
Wow.
And a 3.3% increase in imports. They basically reduce transaction costs because they have this inherent understanding of their home country markets, the languages, the business practices, and also their demand for goods from their home countries enhances imports too. It works both ways.
And they're not just employees, they're job creators too. That feels like a really powerful contribution that maybe gets overlooked sometimes.
That's a critical point, and often overlooked. Immigrant entrepreneurs are significant job creators. Statistics Canada found that a quarter, 25% of net new jobs created by private incorporated companies came from immigrant-owned firms.
25%?
Yeah, even though these firms only account for about 17% of all such businesses.
So they're punching above their weight.
Definitely. And over an 11-year period they looked at, immigrant-owned firms consistently generated more net new jobs per firm than businesses owned by Canadian-born individuals.
So it seems like when we cut through some of the noise, some of the public concerns, the economic data clearly paints this picture of immigrants as a vital, maybe even indispensable asset to the Canadian economy.
The data is pretty clear on that front, yes.
Okay, let's pivot now. Let's tackle one of the most pressing concerns highlighted in our sources, and one that's very much dominating the public conversation right now: the impact of immigration on housing prices.
Yeah, this is certainly a complex area, and our deep dive shows that immigration is linked to housing costs. That's clear. But it's really crucial to understand it's not the sole factor driving prices up, not by a long shot. The study we examined looked at municipal-level data from 2006 to 2021, and it focused specifically on the growth of new immigrants defined as those who landed in Canada within the past 5 years.
All right, the recent arrivals. So what did the research concretely find about that connection?
Well, the modeling results indicate that, on average, across municipalities with over 1,000 people, a rise in new immigrants was associated with an 11% rise in both median house values and median monthly rental rates.
11% for both.
Yes. And this association tended to be even more pronounced in the larger municipalities, the bigger cities. So the research clearly shows that an increase in new immigrants is linked statistically to higher housing costs nationwide.
That seems pretty significant, but you mentioned it's complex, not the only factor. Can you elaborate on that complexity? How does that play out?
Well, what's truly noteworthy is how this relationship wasn't consistent over time or across different regions. It varied quite a bit. For instance, in the periods 2006, 2011, and then again 2016, 2021, there was that clear positive correlation we just talked about. Municipalities with more new immigrants also saw bigger increases in housing values. Saskatoon was a really striking example. In one period, a 2.4-fold increase in new immigrants correlated with a 72% increase in median house values.
Okay, strong link there. But there was a different story in the middle period, right, between 2011 and 2016.
Yes, quite a different story then. From 2011 to 2016, there was a real disconnect. Saskatchewan and Alberta, for example, saw significant immigrant growth during that time, but house values changed very little. They stayed pretty flat. Conversely, Ontario experienced the largest increases in house values, despite receiving relatively fewer new immigrants compared to its population size during that specific window.
Huh. So fewer immigrants, but prices went up the most.
Exactly, which resulted in a negative correlation nationally during that specific 5-year period. It really highlights that local economic conditions think oil prices in Alberta then, plus housing policies, and crucially, housing supply challenges. These things play equally, if not sometimes more, significant roles than just immigration numbers alone.
Right. So when we put it all together, how much does immigration actually contribute to these housing price increases overall? That's the takeaway number.
Well, the study estimated that, on average, across all municipalities, the increase in new immigrants accounted for about 11% of the overall increase in house values over that whole 15-year period.
Okay, 11% on average.
But importantly, in the 53 largest municipalities, these are the places where over 80% of new immigrants actually live in 2021.
Right, where most newcomers settle.
Exactly. In those major centers, the rise in new immigrants was linked to a more substantial 21% increase in median house values and a 13% increase in median rents. And the effect on house values was often larger than on rents, which could possibly be due to things like rent control policies dampening the rental market increases in some areas.
So it's a factor, especially in big cities, but deeply tied up with supply and other dynamics.
Precisely.
This leads to a really critical question for policymakers, doesn't it? How do you effectively balance ambitious immigration targets with the absolute pressing need to ensure there's adequate housing supply? It seems like a major tension.
It is a major tension, and the conclusion from the sources is pretty clear. Immigration is a factor influencing housing costs, but its impact is heavily conditioned, heavily shaped by local economic conditions, existing housing policies, and especially the responsiveness or lack thereof of housing supply. Future policy assessments really need to consider both the spatial differences, city versus town, and the temporal dimensions, how things change over time. Because these patterns are dynamic, they're not guaranteed to persist in the same way going forward.
Okay, so we've talked about the crucial economic contributions immigrants make, and we've dug into that complex link with housing. But our sources also reveal that despite all this, many immigrants face significant, persistent barriers to truly thriving, to reaching their full potential here in Canada.
That's such a critical part of this deep dive into the actual immigrant experience. The potential of newcomers is, unfortunately, often unrealized because of a range of these persistent challenges. One of the biggest barriers that comes up again and again is language proficiency. Now, programs like LINC exist, that's language instruction for newcomers to Canada, but they often suffer from really limited capacity and incredibly long wait lists. We're talking, in some cases, up to a year just to get into a class, and that's after often waiting a long time just for the language assessment in the first place.
The year wait, wow. And just knowing about these services, finding them, that can be a huge challenge too, right? The system isn't always that easy to navigate.
Absolutely. Many newcomers just aren't well connected to the whole network of available services. Our sources indicate that only about 38% of adult immigrants actually accessed any formal settlement services in their first year here.
Only 38%.
Yeah. There's no clear sort of centralized process to communicate all this information effectively. Even the official IRCC website, this Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, can be months, sometimes even years, out of date on service listings. It can just be overwhelming trying to navigate the sheer number of organizations, especially when promotional materials are often only in English. And options are particularly limited if you're settling in a more rural area.
So even with the best intentions, the system itself can sometimes be a barrier. What about the job market then? Once they arrive, language aside, how easy is it to find work, especially good work?
Well, the critical question there is, how do newcomers even get their foot in the door without already having established networks?
Yeah, that Canadian experience catch-22.
Exactly. Our sources state that a massive 65% to 85% of jobs are never even publicly advertised.
Really? That high?
That high. They're filled instead through existing connections, word of mouth. And so nearly half of unemployed immigrants cite a lack of professional connections as their primary barrier to finding work.
And then layered on top of that, there's the pervasive issue of discrimination.
Yes. Unfortunately, research consistently shows job applicants with names perceived as foreign-sounding are 20 to 40% less likely to get a call back for an interview.
20 to 40% less likely. That's stark.
It is stark. And employers often discount foreign work experience and foreign education, even if it's relevant. This leads to immigrants with foreign credentials being almost 3 times more likely to be overqualified for the jobs they do get compared to non-immigrants. And many newcomers talk about feeling this glass ceiling that prevents them from getting promotions or advancing in their careers.
What's particularly striking, I found in our sources, is the specific and often heartbreaking challenge around regulated professions. Doctors, engineers, nurses.
Oh, it's a massive hurdle.
Yeah.
Huge. Half of all economic immigrants actually arrive intending to work in regulated professions. But their foreign credentials, even if they were perfectly valid for immigrant selection purposes, good enough to let them into Canada,
Right.
are often not recognized for actually working in that profession once they're here.
Mm.
And the process to get those credentials recognized, it's expensive, it's incredibly time-consuming, it's frankly exhausting for many,
Mm-hmm.
and it leads to that really unfortunate, often cited reality of foreign-trained doctors driving taxis. It's a powerful image, isn't it? It really is. Such a waste of potential.
A tremendous loss of potential. And it really signals just how significant these systemic barriers can be. And sometimes there can even be resistance from the existing regulatory bodies themselves because, limiting the number of professionals in a field inherently ensures scarcity and potentially higher earnings for those already practicing.
Are there any glimmers of progress on this front, though? Any signs the system is beginning to adapt, maybe learning from these issues?
Yes, thankfully, there are pockets of encouraging change, some positive examples. Alberta's Labor Mobility Act, for instance, streamlines the recognition of credentials between provinces. That provides a potential model that could be adopted more widely, nationally.
Okay.
And the College of Registered Nurses of Alberta has a pilot program for internationally educated nurses. It uses competency-based tests to quickly assess their actual skills and identify specific training gaps, rather than automatically requiring them to go back and do years of full re-education.
That makes sense. Focus on the gaps. Exactly. And these kinds of efforts are just crucial.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, immigrants' success, their ability to contribute fully using their skills and experience, is profoundly intertwined with Canada's overall prosperity and our ability to thrive as a country.
Okay, so with all these complex insights, the challenges, the contributions, the shifts in public sentiment, the barriers, what is the Canadian government actually doing to address these issues? How is it adapting its immigration strategy going forward?
Well, our sources included Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada's IRCC's 2025-2027 strategic plan. And that outlines their sort of forward-looking approach. It really emphasizes a move towards what they call well-managed and coordinated migration. The idea is to align immigration more closely with Canada's actual social, economic, and regional needs.
And this involves some pretty significant changes to immigration levels, doesn't it? Particularly looking at temporary residence, which is new.
Indeed. That's a big shift. For the first time ever, the official integration levels plan will include specific targets for temporary residents, not just permanent residents. The ambitious goal they've set is to reduce temporary resident volumes down to 5% of Canada's total population by the end of 2026.
5%.
5%. And this includes things like new intake caps for international student programs. They're projecting about a 35% reduction in new study permits issued compared to 2023 levels. That's a major policy shift.
Right. So clearly aiming for a more maybe balanced and sustainable approach, trying to address some of those public concerns about volume and strain on services we talked about earlier.
Seemed to be the goal.
What else is on their strategic agenda?
Well, a key priority remains enhancing Francophone immigration. There's a formal policy now aiming to boost the vitality and, crucially, the demographic weight of Francophone minority communities outside Quebec. The plan also focuses heavily on improving client service excellence, mainly through digital modernization.
Better technology.
Yeah, aiming for faster, more client-friendly services, using new online portals, new case management platforms. This is really crucial if they want to address those long wait times and the navigational difficulties that so many newcomers currently face.
Okay, thinking back to our discussion earlier about the leaky bucket immigrants leaving Canada, how might these changes in the government strategic plan impact that phenomenon? Will it help with immigrant retention address that challenge?
That's a good question. While the strategic plan generally aims to improve the overall system management and integration, for example, by streamlining services and trying to address regional needs better through programs like the Provincial Nominee Program, the PNP, there aren't explicit direct retention targets for specific groups mentioned in this particular strategic plan. That's more of a recommendation we saw in other sources. However, programs like the PNP have already been pretty instrumental in decentralizing economic immigrants, moving them away from just the biggest cities. And the PNP also tends to attract immigrants who already have Canadian work or study experience, which typically leads to better labor market outcomes.
At potentially higher retention down the road.
Potentially, yes.
Hmm.
The logic is that better economic integration might lead to better retention.
It really sounds like a complex balancing act they're trying to achieve, addressing public concerns, optimizing for sustainability, while still trying to maintain the undeniable benefits that immigration brings to Canada.
It's definitely a tightrope walk.
So this deep dive has really shown us, hasn't it, that Canada's immigration story is just far more nuanced, more dynamic, more intricate than any simple headline could ever convey. We started with that long-held ideal of Canada as a multicultural beacon. Then we explored those very real, very rapid shifts in public opinion recently. We uncovered the surprising reality of why some immigrants, including those we most want to keep, are choosing to leave. We weighed the vital economic benefits they bring against that. We navigated the complex link to housing costs. And we shed light on the significant, persistent barriers newcomers still face in finding success here.
Yeah, when you connect all those threads, look at the bigger picture. It seems clear that Canada faces a really crucial juncture right now. The foundational strengths of our multicultural model, which has, historically at least, fostered mutual identification and pretty positive integration outcomes. Those strengths are now genuinely being challenged by rising public anxieties. And those anxieties seem rooted in very tangible concerns like housing affordability, economic strain, and the capacity of our services.
It's quite striking, isn't it, how different sources can highlight such conflicting realities almost side by side. You have a strong historical public support versus these recent rapid shifts in opinion, or the immense economic contributions versus those high rates of onward migration for key groups like economic immigrants and former international students. It's really a landscape showing both undeniable success and some very pressing challenges at the same time.
It really is. And this prompts, I think, an important thought for you, our listener, to maybe consider as we wrap up. Given all this compelling evidence that immigrants are vital for our economy and our population growth, but also that they face significant barriers and are increasingly choosing to leave, what specific actions do you think are most critical for Canada to take right now? What needs to happen to ensure the long-term success, the full integration, and ultimately the retention of newcomers? If you had to pick one thing, what's one step you believe would make the biggest difference going forward? Something to mull over.